Right, for those of you that I
Sorry.
don't, that's okay. That I don't know, although I think I know most of the folks on the call. And I'm in the economic development team in the director's office at the Oregon Department of Agriculture. So I work with a few folks, just a handful, who help promote agricultural businesses and food manufacturers all over the world, domestically, locally, and regionally. And so today I'm here to talk a little bit about a pilot that we have started in Oregon, creating these regional food and agriculture business centers. And I feel very fortunate to have one of our centers on the call today. Rogue Valley Food System Network is one of the pilot centers. So, yes, hand claps. So I think, and I don't know, Andrew, how much time you have for me on the agenda. Could you give me a reminder of that?
Yeah, no, I think we've got you, and then we can have an open discussion. So whatever time you need, and that this is what I've got for today. So
Okay. All
we're
right.
in no stress. We have an hour today, but don't expect you to fill that whole time either.
Okay. So the regional food and ag business centers essentially have evolved from a lot of, I think, different needs that we've been hearing producers ask for across the state. I think this group probably better than many understand a lot of the realities of small producers in particular and producers that are trying to scale into regional markets. We also have a lot of food manufacturers, small food businesses, and entrepreneurs who I think there's a lot of resources to help them get started in Oregon, but not a lot of services that help them when they're entering a higher scale of production and needing maybe more expertise and business technical assistance to help them think about taking on growth for their business. So these centers are not actual locations, they are organizations where the state is already making investments. So all three of these centers were chosen in collaboration with Business Oregon as well as the governor's office because one of the asks of the governor's office has been over the last year or so is for agencies to coordinate our public resources better. And so what we've done is take a look at some of the ways in which primarily Oregon, because they do have more general fund grant programs where they can support farms and food businesses, as well as organizations that support those businesses themselves. So a lot of service-based organizations, they can put more money on the ground than ODA typically can. ODA is a basically has a dual mission where we are the regulators for natural resources in the state, but we also have an economic development mission. We're one of two agencies in the whole state that have that responsibility. So so we're limited in what we can do with funding we have for economic development. Business Oregon, on the other hand, much bigger agency and has been, in different ways through some of their grant programs, the Rural Opportunity Initiative, as well as their innovation hubs, are thinking about and trying to, drive public dollars into some of these agricultural communities. So we wanted to take a look at those grant models that Business Oregon is currently running and see how we might use those as a way to leverage these food and ag business centers. So the centers are currently funded through some remaining regional food system infrastructure funding that we have. Some of you may recall that before this administration, but before the change in administration, there was a very significant piece of legislation, the Food System Transformation Framework, which was a $4 billion piece of legislation that created many different types of grant programs that were intended to decentralize the food system and start building programs within the middle of the supply chain, as well as business development services to help individual farms and businesses build an on-ramp to get to the middle of the supply chain. That covered many different industries. Two programs that came out of that transformation framework were the USDA Regional Food Business Centers, as well as the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Program. Those programs were intended to be complementary to one another. Many of you, I think, were on our advisory group for the USDA Regional Food Business Centers, which unfortunately were terminated earlier than the RFSI program. So what we did in Oregon was decide to use what we had in those remaining RFSI funding in that program to sort of bridge some of the gaps that were left behind when the USDA Regional Food Business Center closed. So Oregon was one of 6 states that was part of that program. So some of our intention is to bring over those resources that were created and developed over the last 2.5 years under the USDA Regional Food Business Center and make sure that they're on the ground here in Oregon. That wasn't something that we had a chance to do yet under that program. Oregon, out of those 6 states, was sort of middle of the pack when it came to getting the resources out here. So we didn't have as many programs running as some of the other states did in this space. So that's in part one of our goals with the centers is to start deploying some of the resources that were available to us through the national regional food business centers. And then the other goal is to start serving clients really where they are, agricultural and food business clients where they are in their region. So that is going to look different across the centers. So Rogue Valley Food System Network is one of the pilot centers. The Strategic Economic Development Corporation, SEDCOR, is our second pilot in the Mid-Willamette Valley. And then the third pilot is the Eastern Oregon or the Eastern Economic Development Eastern Border. Gosh, I'm going to just really botch that name.
Eastern Oregon Border Board.
Well, it is Eastern
There's a
Oregon.
reason nobody knows their name.
It's EOBB, but it's a very long name, but I've been calling it the Eastern Oregon Border Board. And that group is really tasked with looking at from I think it's like 40 to 70 miles west of the Oregon border, looking at a lot of the issues affecting producers and why a lot of those larger scale farmers may be leaving the state and going to Idaho. And just really thinking about, particularly in that region, the future of a lot of that larger scale farming and how we can keep those farms in production. So it has, I think, more emphasis on succession planning and long-term ag viability in those in the Eastern Oregon region. But each of the regions was selected because of their kind of diverse landscape in not just geography, but the types of producers and food businesses that are sort of trending in those regions, and some of the different needs that they have in the middle of the supply chain, as well as business technical assistance. So, and we can talk about that if you want to. We have just started kind of helping our centers get off the ground. They're very nascent. Allison can talk a little bit about, if she wants to, about what's going on for their center. But we have essentially what we have is funding through this year. So this is a very fast build, essentially. We are going to be hiring a couple of contractors to help us run technical assistance programming across the centers, as well as for other producers. So the producers don't only need to be served by the centers to take advantage of trainings and workshops. They can also participate based on whether the content is relevant for them. However, a lot of the design and development of those training opportunities are going to be determined by the recommendations that come from the centers, as well as ODA. So we will be running some technical assistance programming starting this summer, and that'll run throughout the remaining part of the year. Most of what will happen this summer is going to be virtual, and it's going to focus on building the capacity of service providers, not producers themselves, because for obvious reasons, producers are fairly tied up until the fall. But then in the late fall, the workshops will begin that are really going to target more specifically working with and delivering content to producers and other kind of middle of the supply chain businesses. Um, so that is sort of the overview. In terms of sustainability, we're pursuing a lot of different funding opportunity to support the centers, as well as legislative concepts and policy packages with the 2027-2029 biennium. We are proposing to build off of the centers, continuing to fund the existing centers, as well as bringing on a couple of new regions. And we'll have to see what happens with whether those policy concepts are picked up by the governor's recommended budget. And then from there, we'll have more guidance. But we're also looking at soft funding and applying for federal grants to support the centers at this point in time as well. Let's see. What else? I guess I'll stop there and see what questions you might have, or areas where I can provide more specific information.
Amy, when we met, our team met last week, and Jim Couples shared the farm viability trainings would be coming soon, but we didn't have time to really dive into
Yeah.
what that might look like or what kind of contents might be coming available so that we are not duplicating those resources. Do you have any insight on what that
Yeah.
package looks like?
We're getting ready to finalize that contract. And so once that organization is on board, we can start I think defining what those workshops will be. I think generally speaking, they're going to cover different types of legal designations for farmers and producers, as well as tax designations, exploring what those are, and based on the type of business you intend to be or you are, so if you are a grower or a producer, but you're not a value-added producer or you're not a vertically integrated business, what are the best sort of tax designations for you? What are those tax laws? Kind of exploring what it looks like to be an LLC operation or things like that. So some of that's going to be kind of general business content and just setting your business up for success, because changing midstream can be very difficult if you do decide to do that later. We're also going to be working on helping to, one of the aspects of that contract will actually be to do more capacity building with service providers to understand the tools available for succession planning. I think that's probably one of the biggest needs in Oregon at this time, given what we know about farmland changing hands over the next 10 to 20 years, and really wanting to make sure that producers have, even if they're not near retirement or near secession, they knowing that information at any point in time in their business journey is really important and helpful. So, generally, succession planning is going to be part of those workshops. That can also include some of the conservation easement options and working lands trainings, and exploring what those options might be for your farm. But they're going to be, I would say, the viability workshops are going to be more business success heavy. So going over and learning how to, understand your profit and loss statements, or understanding what an enterprise budget is, or, really trying to set you up, I think, with your financial and accounting management skills. So, and we're also going to be particularly focused on vertically integrated businesses. So helping farmers understand what options they have to explore value-added product development. And so, and then, there will be, so there's really sort of two parts to that, is building the skill set of some of our center staff in that capacity building, or center technical assistance providers. Doesn't have to actually be staffing of a center, but can be a recommended service agency that, for example, SBDCs or MISO or some of these other groups um, may want to have some of their staff become better educated about succession planning. So that contractor will be responsible for that type of content.
Could you explain that a little bit more? Like which service provider, how service providers access these and who's eligible to participate? Does the center decide? How does that work?
Well, we will work with so each center is a little bit different in the strength of their referral system and their network of technical assistance providers. So Rogue Valley Food System Network, for example, and Carrie and Allison can speak to this, but they seem to have a much stronger and deeper relationship with a lot of the economic development and entrepreneurial organizations in their region than, say, the Eastern Oregon Border Board. They are looking for more, for example, Eastern Oregon Border Board is looking for a little bit more guidance from ODA and possibly from these contractors that we're going to be hiring to determine what that referral system and technical assistance kind of communication should and could look like for them. The same with SEDCOR. SEDCOR is mostly focused on their ag launch program and really helping to upskill and bring new and more modernized technology to some of the growers in the Mid-Willamette who've lost a lot of where the processing capacity in the Mid-Willamette region has disappeared. So the technical needs are going to be different across the centers, and they're going to have what we'll be doing. One of the first things we'll be doing is, spending the first month or so with that contractor, kind of assessing and planning for, who are the technical assistance providers in the state that are best suited to receive more training for succession planning, and where are they located, what style and format is going to be best for them over the summer. These will most likely be virtual cohorts or communities of practice that contractor will help lead, right? So they'll sort of be, what the question you're really asking has yet to be answered because the contractor isn't on board yet, but will be in the next couple of weeks. And that's when a lot of the work will start. So, it could be that contractor, attends these meetings and makes sure that, maybe there's someone from this group that would be, a potential technical assistance provider. So in this space, right? So we'll develop a process for determining, what that cohort looks like. Yes, it will be some from center referrals as well as other stakeholder groups or partner groups like this one.
I think it's really interesting because NEOEDD is like we are a lot in that other group. Like not a lot of economic development districts show up in this part of the food system work. Really, most people are working outside of ag. And one of the reasons for that, in part, is that some of the funding that economic development districts can get is they can't use that funding to work with ag. So I think there's a real opportunity to bring these types of food businesses, farm and food businesses, into the fold with the greater economic development work, which I think would have a tremendous amount of value. But at the same time, I think that I'm really glad that OCFSN has developed to the point where and partners have really grown and developed. In some cases, new organizations have formed like in the last 10, 12 years, where there's a lot more capacity and expertise in many of these types of TA that you're talking about. It's really it's gonna, I mean, there's succession planning, right? But then there's like within succession planning, every situation there's similarities and differences in every situation. And so I think it'll be interesting to see both like who ends up coming forward because they're interested in doing this contracting and what the different needs are as expressed by the different regions, because they sound like they're pretty aware of their challenges and have really different focuses, like what's happening. I'm really glad you talked about what's happening at the Eastern Oregon Border Board, because I'm like, why the heck did they get picked for that? Like, why did they want to do it? And now I understand totally, because their biggest challenge is not having funding to support the services they provide to people who live in Idaho, and then losing some of their base of funding by what's happening in the farming. So they may have some similarities to SEDCOR. I don't know. I mean, if their loss of processing has anything to do with what's going on there or not. But I'd be very curious to see how information is shared on the work that the different centers are doing. I know Allison won't be keeping anything from us. Whatever not that she has to do anything special or different, but I feel like for me, I really would like to know what the Eastern Oregon Border Board is doing. And I've delivered succession planning training a long time ago in their territory, because they have a trade show every year that's associated with ag stuff. And it was a great group, and it was really, really fun and rewarding to do it. But I don't know that it would be something that I think my organization could really benefit from a refresher in the succession planning. So, like when Andrew was saying, how do you get into a cohort to get training as a provider? I'll be looking forward to hearing that. But I do feel like in the bigger picture, I definitely see that there's kind of this sphere of service providers that work with small businesses. And in that group, there are service providers who focus on scaling. So but it's like scaling for a food business is different than scaling for a farm in some ways. Anyway, I'm glad that
Yeah.
we're having this conversation, because I feel like I have a lot to learn.
Well, and I think, that's, Malher, economic development director is on our, um, he's one of the partners out there. And, he has said many times that, I think, at least from, I think sometimes from, maybe not so much for you, Sarah, but for a lot of other traditional economic development staff really have they have set, and either through the RDOs, through the regional development offices for USDA or for I'm sorry, Business Oregon, or some of the other district partners, that they, and SBDCs too, just don't feel like they often have enough of the resources they need to really understand the realities of farmers and what their needs are. I mean, I know it sounds, I mean, I don't, I know it probably goes overstated, but, just a lot of farmers and food businesses don't, necessarily have any like foundational business training, and need, might not even know how to put together a business plan. And sometimes the resources that are available to those providers are not, they don't have an emphasis on what it's like to run a farm business versus a tech business versus some other sort of small entrepreneurial business that's not um, at all like really relatable to what it's like to be dependent on natural resources for your business. So I think part of this is trying to, a lot of states are also trying to I think, understand how we can better plug into traditional economic development spaces and work with them, but also make sure that, that these types of professionals have more of an understanding, I think, of the tools that are really going to be beneficial. Because what we hear from SBDCs and others sometimes is like they can't even remember the last time a farmer came in their office to ask them a question, or maybe they had one phone call from a farmer about a program. Um, Aggie bonds, for example, like no in Business Oregon probably can count on one hand how many calls they've ever had about Aggie bonds. And that could be for various reasons. I mean, Aggie bonds, they're fraught with that program is fraught with some challenges. But I guess the point is like I think, part of our economic development teams in the state sort of feel like they're grasping for straws in terms of how to help farmers and yet I think we also need to figure out ways that we can engage farmers and producers kind of on their terms. And I think that is also kind of, as working with farmers, that's not always easy to do either. So, um,
Are there
centers, yeah.
states that are have achieved more integration than Oregon in that regard?
Well, I would say, I mean, Montana does have regional, I don't know what they're called, but they're sort of these regional networks or centers as well. Now, theirs are structured a little differently. They have sort of a competitive process for becoming one of these food and ag business centers. But they by becoming a center, they then have the ability to tap into this network of different types of providers and for different purposes. And again, they've been running their program for probably almost 20 years. So, we've got a lot to learn from them. They're also legislatively mandated to run those centers. We've got a long way to go to sort of build this out and we've got a lot of congressional support for it. But in terms of just getting state legislative support for it, or even getting it on the radar of our state legislature, has not been done yet. But we have been communicating with Merkley and Wyden's office pretty regularly about the centers. I think that their staff I mean, once we get the centers sort of up and running and they're, actually meeting with clients, um, we'll probably go out with some of the senators' field staff to the centers to do some visits and things like that. Because the Senate version, there's been conversations about sort of a potential marker bill in the Senate version of the Farm Bill for um, kind of a fix it or a 2.0 regional food business center program. And that could mean that, again, states like Oregon and others could potentially tap into those federal dollars if they were to become available in the next few years.
I dropped the link to the Montana Food and Ag Development Center Network. And it's pretty interesting to read through how robust it is. They've got 12 centers across the state. It's been an interesting model to learn from.
Yeah. We visited where someone in our director's office went and visited Montana, or was at a WASDA Western Ag State Department Association meeting in Montana. And that's when some of this really we had been talking about how to bridge the programs, talking about the loss or the gap of not having the USDA Regional Food Business Center program running anymore. And when that deputy director came back, sort of said, I think I might have an idea or a solution to help us with, some more kind of hub and spoke models like Montana's doing, and that's sort of where a lot of this began from.
Allison, how do you feel about maybe speaking to your experience as you're launching this center, starting it up?
Yeah. I can share. It's been a quick steep on ramp, and the Rogue Valley Food System Network exists to convene and connect people and organizations and resources to build an equitable, ecologically sound, and economically viable food system here in Jackson and Josephine County. And I think the greatest tension we hold is how do we continue to be a convener and a connector as we help to ground and stabilize this thing that could be much bigger than one organization. So we kind of joke down here in Southern Oregon, par for the course. It's a very collaborative model. We're not a center. We don't have a robust TA program, but we do have a lot of different connections. So our approach has been like the first thing I did was send out a survey to understand who was doing TA already, what their expertise was, who they were serving, where they lived, and then what programming they had already had planned for this year coming up. And so we had 23 responses. And I'll actually share that with y'all in case this is your first time hearing about it and you do deliver services, technical assistance services for folks here in Southern Oregon. You can fill that out and we'll have you on our radar. Of those 23 responses, I was just pulling together the list of upcoming events or workshops because we're really taking the perspective of not duplicating or developing a whole bunch of new programming. We're taking our time to develop the structure within which we can have a robust navigation or referral system. So understanding who's doing what and being able to better connect people who are looking for services to the services. I'm sure y'all have heard the age-old story of farmers and food businesses being ready and excited about a business and then totally inundated by like where to go for just that one next step or who to talk to. So they'll just go to the one person they know. So having it be kind of easily accessible. Oh yeah, so there's I have right now I'm tracking 66 workshops, events, ongoing. And this is not just within Southern Oregon, this is also statewide that people from Southern Oregon can access. So it's really fascinating. And there's just such a robust network of technical assistance and support for food and farm entrepreneurs at any stage. And so I think our greatest challenge is figuring out how to like we keep referring to as like we're like we're welcoming them in and trying to figure out like where are you really the one-on-one, where are you, and then just connect them to the right resource. We are using, some of y'all have heard or seen the development of our open impact platform that is essentially it's a community driven online platform that we can create organizations and projects to be able to, for the network to be able to see itself a little bit easier. But we are going to be using that to create projects around a farmer and then be able to invite you, like I'm looking at Carly. Carly, you have a profile on open impact. If we are like, you know what, Carly has a really great XYZ workshop coming up, or she can really help you with this. We're going to go ahead and pull her into your project. And then Carly becomes a collaborator on Farmer Joe's profile on the open impact. And then it's like, actually, you need to talk to, oh, you want to do a VAPG. We're going to send you Rich. Here's a little lead up. Here's who this person is. Do you have capacity to work with this person? You'll get pulled into their project as a collaborator. And all that will do is kind of have this like level of transparency of who's working with this person on what. And there's also some task management and project management and events and timeline capacity. So Yeah, ask me to. That's kind of where we're at. We're figuring it out. We're building the ship as it goes and working really closely with Jem, Couples, and Amy to understand how to create the best, how to how to how to do it in alignment with what we need to be doing to keep it going into the future. But we have 8 partners at the table, um, who are the advisory team, and then a whole list of a lot of you here and what you're doing, that we're just trying to connect people better. Happy to answer any questions, or I'm happy to share the list of those workshops once we get it cleaned up and dialed in so that we all know who's doing what around the state. Andrew, if you could help me
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'll follow up.
find that, because most of them are kind of public facing or ongoing, and so yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And we know it's still early days, right? Things are just getting off the ground, but it sounds like folks are hitting the ground running. Any other questions? What about folks who are not in these 3 regions? Do you have any questions? Are you, the folks that you work with, are they able to access any resources through these centers? I see Kristen's here on the coast, for example. Is it not, it's very regional focused? Can folks kind of come over? Well, how does that work?
So the workshops, we have some limitations because of USDA restrictions on um, industries. And so some of the types of um, industries or commodities that can't directly be supported with these funds are meat and poultry and wild caught seafood. We can offer content training for aquaculture. That if that is of a need, we can do that. Um, so but that doesn't mean that, say, for example, a rancher, and I mean, Eastern Oregon, case in point, we have many ranchers in Eastern Oregon. Are, we would not say, for example, um, coordinate or have a workshop on small scale processing or custom exempt processing or something that really focused on the meat supply chain. Unfortunately, we can't use these funds to pay for a workshop like that. If a rancher wants to come to a workshop on um, understanding how to set up your business or understanding, how to learn your chart of accounts, then things like that, something that are more generically related to business, just business management, fundamental business administration, that we can provide those types of workshops, and ranchers could be included. They could self-select to come to those workshops. Just sort of using that as an example of some of the ways in which the funds can't really go deeper and really address specific needs within different industry groups, unfortunately. But those are kind of the primary like industries that we can't have direct content for. Value-added processing, um, we can generally we can talk a lot about that actually in depth, and we can also do some kind of light touch workshops around value-added processing across different categories. So, for example, if you were making a product that did include a meat or an animal protein, and it included other ingredients that were a specialty crop, for example, we can have workshops um, on topics like that, or what the food safety kind of implications would be for that, right? Because you would be looking at multiple schemes because of those different origins of product. So That being said, yes, I mean, if there's a coastal producer that is interested in a workshop, and then yes, they would be able to attend that workshop. Now, I think what remains to be kind of understood, and again, once we bring our statewide technical assistance contractor on board, we'll be able to better determine this. But I think, the Rogue Valley Center is so far ahead of the other regions. I mean, what the statewide technical assistance contractor will do is essentially what Allison just described that she's already done for her region, right? Is to sort of take a look at and know what are the existing technical assistance opportunities out there in the state, in the region, maybe even nationally that might exist. Has seemed to, already developed a calendar or collected those. The statewide contractor will be doing that as well. But it won't only be doing, sort of what's existing, but then, okay, we've got this 6 months to stand a few things up. What can we rapidly get off the ground? It's unlikely that that technical assistance contractor will be one person. It'll probably be a suite of subs and, sort of filling in these gaps as quickly as we can. So we intend to also be looking at some of the other farms and businesses that we've been investing in outside of just the center's referrals. So, for example, ODA and Business Oregon, I mentioned, have a lot of grantees that are farms and food businesses. We've spent, public dollars investing in those businesses, particularly for working capital. And what really is sort of missing in the next step of their business development is market access. And so we intend to help those clients as well through these workshop and training offerings. But again, that doesn't mean that you have to either be referred by a center or be an ODA recipient of a grant in order to take advantage of these workshops. They will be, they will be available to, they will be specifically likely in these regions, but they will be available to neighboring groups as well.
So would succession planning be one of the types of workshops that ranchers could take advantage of?
Yeah.
And is there going to be, is the way that the three centers are set up, will they have cross-pollination or regular sharing amongst the three centers?
They will likely do that. Jim's sort of he's the coordinator for the centers. So far I haven't seen that the centers are meeting together, but they will under the technical assistance work, and for surely they'll be doing that. They are meeting, each center is meeting individually with ODA, I think right now, once a month. Jim usually meets with, is that right, Allison? I think it meets with you once a month.
And then
But
with all centers, every other month.
every other month. Okay. Yeah. Once the technical assistance programs get up and running, I think there's going to be a little more sort of coordination between, maybe there's someone at one center who's going to be meeting with, I mean, again, I think some of these are going to be set up like peer groups. And so there definitely will be a lot of cross-pollination. That's really what we hope happens, particularly over these summer months, to get those established. Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions or thoughts for Amy? I know that the regional food business centers, the Northwest Rocky Mountain Region one had business builder grants. Is that something like on the future horizon for these centers? If it like say, is it part of the planning as you're fundraising or thinking about policy pops or options like that to do grants?
Yeah, right now, grants that are state funded for equipment, or infrastructure or working capital is not it's not a high on the list. But it could, I mean, obviously, other groups can bring something like that forward, through the legislative process and bill sponsorship. It's not in a pop from ODA, and I don't think it's in a pop from Business Oregon. Um, one of the ways Montana has an interesting approach where they sometimes require that in order to be approved for state funding, um, a farmer or these groups of producers need to be vetted by centers and have certain aspects of their business plan sort of vetted or approved before they can apply for funding. And as someone who administers grants, I can tell you that we do see a lot of applications where there are certain, fundamental elements of proposal that are missing, and that make it difficult to understand, what level of um, business acumen a producer might have, or what understanding they might even have of different regulations or requirements, depending on what they're hoping to do with their proposal. So we are hearing that this may be a direction that we go with the centers. And again, I think that has a lot to do with trying to kind of upskill or better skill all of our professional development services with understanding um, what, particularly in the middle of the supply chain, that looks like. So so that could be a direction in the future. Right now, we're just trying to, get the centers established and I think, prove their relevance and get support so we're going to need a lot of support to keep the centers running in the next legislative session. We know that because of the because of HR1, Oregon's facing I can't remember exactly the figures, but it's multiple millions of dollars every year for the next 10 years when HR1 kind of rolls in. And so our budgets are expected to be pretty flat at the public agency level. And so we've got a lot of deficit to fill because of SNAP and because of Medicaid loss, right? So I don't know I know that these working capital grants might not be as, I think, politically feasible as they have in previous bienniums. But I do think down the road we could see that centers could help prepare proposals. And I mean, what we find, and I think some of you know this already too, but we find that, a lot of organizations that can write, they can write grants, they can make strong arguments for funds, typically do receive those funds, and they receive those repetitively. And they're getting those funds not just from ODA, but they're receiving those funds from other public agencies, and the agencies aren't communicating with each other enough to know that, there's quite a bit of state investment going into some of these organizations and businesses. So I think it's an issue of parity and kind of looking at the extent to which, we're helping people, we're helping farms, and we're helping businesses learn how to better prepare proposals, and also what resources exist to help them do that. So could be more funding for things like grant writing workshops. And while we know farmers don't, particularly really like to do that, not everyone can afford to hire a grant writer. We know some organizations and farmers aren't able to do that, but not everyone is. And so, whether it's that or a loan application or forgivable loan application, something like that, we still know that from talking to those service providers that, there's just really poor, the quality is generally pretty poor in those applications. So I think that's also part of what, over time, when we think about upstream, what we want to see with ag viability, it's really, kind of headed in that direction.
I'm wondering about, I love it. I'm so thankful you're talking about that, because I wonder if in Montana, where they now have this requirement where, or at least for some funding streams that have the requirement for people to be vetted by a center, but ideally, because in order to especially if we're thinking about regional resilience, the need to remove barriers to the people who really want to farm and who want to farm in a way that is going to feed people regionally. It's so important that they get that kind of assistance so that they are a viable business, so they are a good investment for the state. But it's also really a problem with the same people getting money over and over and over again. It's just amazing. And you look at them and they don't hesitate for 1 second to come in for another $750,000. And so I would look forward to that kind of coordination. Um, and I'm so thankful that, there's some relationships here and we have had a conversation going on about regional food system resiliency, and it's really has a place at the table. And I'm glad the centers are talking to each other, because I think there's also an opportunity for the other centers to maybe learn more about how the connections and the potential impact, different types of impacts, but important impacts in Oregon.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up too about resiliency, because I think that is, again, with the governor, the first lady's resiliency plans, I think there is the opportunity for the centers to also have their own priorities, regional priorities. And so, particularly for climate resiliency and emergency preparedness, and thinking about, if there is going to be, say, for example, a client in their region that is, is applying for a grant, how does that proposal address the priorities of that region? And so part of this is about decentralizing a lot of this decision making so that, we're getting away from this systemic issue of funding only certain types of farms or only certain types of organizations over and over, and better equipping the centers to be part of that kind of vetting process and determining what does, each region resiliency looks a little different. So with that in mind, how do we direct funds there?
Or who among the philanthropic players in Oregon is at the table in this conversation?
No one yet. Yeah.
Because look at what private foundations, they have gone through a 10-year transformation to address this very issue. The same well-resourced organizations in the same places were getting all of their money because the applications coming in from other places were just not competitive. So they may have some insights into what the benefits are to doing that, how well they're accomplishing their goal of achieving, whatever their missions are, but basically they're supposed to be altruistic, right? So I think, and also the processes that they went through and the lessons that they learned along the way could be valuable
Yeah.
as well.
I might follow up with you about that, Sarah, because I know a little bit about some of those funders, but I
Well,
think
Maribel de Leon, who's at MMT, came out of Adelante, so she would be a good one to
oh,
talk to.
oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt right here. That's really awesome. I'm glad that connection's been made, and it's an important piece to helping further the centers. Amy, thank you so much for taking an hour and talking with us about this. Really informative. Really appreciate that. And appreciate y'all for sticking around and learning and asking good questions. And share out this recording to the network and the notes. And yeah, we'll stay connected. Farm Viability Conference is coming up. Rich put a link for registration in the chat. Thanks, y'all.
Great. Thank you. Bye. Hey, are you running to another meeting?
No, that was great. Here, let
Okay.
me hang this up here. I'll stop the recording.
Oh, okay.